behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, a family feud simmers that could reshape the British monarchy forever. While millions watched the fairy tale wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in 2018, few could have predicted that within just a few years, this very union would create the deepest crisis the royal family has faced since the abdication of King Edward VIII in 1936. The question that now haunts every corridor of power, every private meeting, and every royal decision is simple yet explosive: will King William finally take decisive action against his own brother and sister-in-law? The stakes couldn't be higher. On one side stands tradition, duty, and the future of an institution that has survived wars, scandals, and centuries of change. On the other stands family loyalty, personal freedom, and two people who claim they were pushed to the breaking point. This is not just another royal drama played out in tabloid headlines. This is the real story of how a modern monarchy grapples with ancient traditions, how brothers can become strangers, and how one couple's quest for independence could either destroy or transform the most famous royal family in the world. What happens next will determine not just the fate of Harry and Meghan, but the very soul of the British royal family itself. The clock is ticking, the world is watching, and King William must decide: will he choose the crown over his brother? The morning of May 19, 2018, should have been one of pure joy for the British royal family. St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle was filled with 2,000 guests, millions more watched around the world, and Prince Harry stood at the altar waiting for his American bride. But even as Meghan Markle walked down that aisle in her stunning Da Vinci gown, there were already whispers behind palace doors that this fairy tale might not have a happy ending. King Charles, then still Prince of Wales, had worked tirelessly to modernize the monarchy. He understood that the royal family needed to evolve with the times, to embrace diversity and connect with a changing world. When Harry fell in love with Meghan, an American actress with a mixed-race heritage and a previous marriage, Charles saw it as an opportunity. Here was a chance to show that the monarchy could be truly inclusive, truly modern. Prince William, Harry's older brother and heir to the throne, had his reservations. Not about Meghan personally, but about the speed at which everything was moving. William had dated Catherine Middleton for nearly 8 years before proposing. He understood the intense pressure that came with marrying into the royal family, the complete loss of privacy, and the weight of duty that would rest on their shoulders. Harry had known Meghan for less than 2 years. During private family meetings in the months leading up to the wedding, William tried to counsel his younger brother. He suggested that Harry take more time, that he help Meghan understand what royal life really meant before making such a permanent commitment. These conversations, meant with love and concern, were misinterpreted by Harry as criticism of his choice and interference in his relationship. The wedding day itself was magnificent. Meghan looked radiant, Harry couldn't stop smiling, and the world celebrated what seemed like a perfect union. The ceremony beautifully blended British tradition with American culture. The gospel choir, the powerful sermon by Bishop Michael Curry, and Meghan's decision to walk part of the aisle alone all signaled that this would be different from previous royal weddings. But, behind the scenes, palace staff were already noticing concerning patterns. Meghan had specific ideas about how things should be done, and she wasn't afraid to express them. She questioned protocols that had been in place for decades, challenged the hierarchy of palace staff, and seemed frustrated by the pace at which the royal machine operated. Some staffers found her approach refreshing and modern. Others saw it as disrespectful to traditions that had served the monarchy well for generations. The first major crack appeared during preparations for the wedding itself. There were disagreements about everything from the choice of tiara to the flavor of cake. Meghan wanted to make changes to established protocols, while palace staff tried to explain why certain traditions existed. These weren't just aesthetic choices, they were laden with historical significance and diplomatic considerations that weren't immediately obvious to someone new to royal life. One particularly telling incident involved the wedding flowers. Meghan had a specific vision for the floral arrangements, but was told that certain flowers weren't appropriate for royal weddings due to their symbolic meanings in different cultures. When she pushed back, asking why flowers could be problematic, she was given a lengthy explanation about diplomatic sensitivities and royal protocol. Her response, according to palace insiders, was to question why such outdated rules should still apply in the modern world. This clash between modern expectations and ancient traditions would become the defining theme of Harry and Meghan's time as working royals. Meghan brought with her the perspective of someone who had built her own career, made her own decisions, and controlled her own narrative. Suddenly, she found herself in an institution where every decision was made by committee, every public appearance was scripted, and personal preferences often had to be sacrificed for the greater good of the monarchy. Harry, meanwhile, was caught between two worlds. On one side was the family and institution he'd been born into, with its unwritten rules, expectations, and sense of duty that had been ingrained in him since childhood. On the other side was the woman he loved, who was struggling to adapt to a way of life that seemed to stifle her independence and authenticity. The newlyweds' first royal tour took them to Australia, New Zealand, Tonga, and Fiji in October 2018. From the outside, it appeared to be a tremendous success. Meghan was praised for her natural ability to connect with people, her grace under pressure, and her genuine interest in the causes she was supporting. The crowds were enormous, the media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, and it seemed like the royal family had found their newest star. But the tour also highlighted some of the fundamental challenges that would later tear the family apart. Meghan was praised for bringing a fresh, modern approach to royal engagements. She hugged people longer than protocol typically allowed, she spoke more personally about issues close to her heart, and she wasn't afraid to show emotion during particularly moving encounters. While the public loved this authenticity, it made some palace officials nervous. There were also practical challenges that few people outside the royal family understand. The physical demands of a royal tour are enormous: dozens of engagements over 2 weeks, constant travel, little sleep, and the pressure to be on every moment they're in public. Meghan was also dealing with the early stages of pregnancy, though this wasn't public knowledge at the time. Perhaps most significantly, the tour showed how intense public interest in Harry and Meghan had become. The crowds were larger than usual, the media attention was unprecedented, and social media was buzzing with every outfit choice, every gesture, and every word they spoke. This level of attention was both thrilling and terrifying. Back in London, other members of the royal family were watching these developments with mixed feelings. Queen Elizabeth II was pleased with how well Meghan had performed on the tour, but she was also aware of the growing tensions within the palace structure. Prince William was happy for his brother's success but worried about the long-term sustainability of such intense public interest. The real problems began when Harry and Meghan returned from their tour and tried to establish their place within the broader royal family structure. They wanted to carve out their own path, to support causes that mattered to them personally, and to have more control over their public image. This put them at odds with the traditional way the royal family operated, where activities were carefully coordinated to avoid overlap and ensure that the most senior royals received the most attention. One of the biggest challenges was the media strategy. The royal family had long-standing relationships with certain media outlets and followed established protocols for managing press coverage. Harry and Meghan wanted to take a more modern approach, using social media directly and being more selective about which media organizations they worked with. They felt that the traditional approach left them vulnerable to negative coverage and didn't allow them to tell their own story effectively. This disagreement came to a head during the planning for their first Christmas as a married couple. Traditionally, all senior royals spent Christmas at Sandringham with the Queen. Harry and Meghan wanted to spend part of the holiday with Meghan's mother, Doria, who would be alone in California. When they were told this wasn't possible due to security concerns and royal tradition, it became a source of significant tension. The incident was relatively minor in the grand scheme of things, but it represented a larger problem. Harry and Meghan felt that they were being forced to choose between their royal duties and their personal relationships. They wanted to honor both, but the rigid structure of royal life seemed to make this impossible. As 2018 came to an end, the cracks in the fairy tale were becoming more visible, at least to those inside the palace walls. Harry was becoming increasingly protective of his wife and frustrated with what he saw as unnecessary restrictions on their freedom. Meghan was struggling to understand why so many aspects of royal life couldn't be modernized or made more flexible. William watched these developments with growing concern. He could see that his brother was unhappy, but he also understood that the structures and traditions Harry was fighting against existed for important reasons. The monarchy had survived for over 1,000 years precisely because it had learned to balance tradition with gradual change.
Sudden, dramatic shifts could destabilize the entire institution. The stage was set for a confrontation that would ultimately change the royal family forever. Harry and Meghan were determined to forge their own path, even if it meant breaking with tradition. William was equally determined to protect the institution he would one day lead. And, caught in the middle was a family trying to balance personal relationships with public duty, ancient traditions with modern expectations, and the competing demands of serving both the crown and their own happiness. What none of them could have predicted was how quickly things would spiral out of control, or how the events of the next few years would force King William to make choices he never wanted to make about the future of his own brother. The year 2019 began with hope but quickly descended into chaos that would forever change the dynamics of the British royal family. Harry and Meghan were expecting their first child, which should have been a time of joy and celebration. Instead, it became the period when their relationship with the royal establishment began to seriously deteriorate. The pregnancy announcement had been made during their successful autumn tour, and the public was thrilled about the prospect of a new royal baby. But, behind palace doors, tensions were mounting over how Harry and Meghan wanted to handle this most personal of royal events. They desired privacy and control over the narrative surrounding their child's birth, which put them at odds with centuries of royal tradition and public expectation. Previous royal births had followed a well-established protocol. The media was informed of the mother's admission to hospital, crowds gathered outside to await news, and the birth was announced with great fanfare from the steps of the hospital or palace. Harry and Meghan wanted something different. They wanted to keep the location of the birth private, limit media access, and announce the news on their own timeline. This wasn't just about personal preference, it reflected a fundamental disagreement about the balance between public interest and private life. The royal family had always accepted that certain aspects of their lives, particularly major milestones like births, marriages, and deaths, belonged as much to the public as to the family itself. Harry and Meghan challenged this assumption, arguing that some things should remain private even for public figures. The negotiations over the birth arrangements became a microcosm of the larger tensions brewing within the family. Palace officials tried to explain the historical significance of traditional protocols and the public's expectation to share in royal celebrations. Harry and Meghan countered that times had changed and that they should be allowed to protect their child's privacy from the very beginning. William found himself in an increasingly difficult position. As Harry's brother, he understood the desire to protect one's family from intense media scrutiny. He and Catherine had faced similar challenges when their own children were born. But, as the future king, William also understood the importance of maintaining the delicate relationship between the monarchy and the public that supported it. The birth of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor on May 6, 2019, became the first major public relations crisis of Harry and Meghan's marriage. They managed to keep the location and timing private, announcing the birth hours after it had occurred and controlling the initial media coverage. While some praised them for taking control of their narrative, others felt shut out of what should have been a shared national celebration. The controversy deepened when Harry and Meghan chose not to use a traditional royal title for their son and decided against the customary photo call on the hospital steps. Instead, they released carefully curated images and gave a brief interview in Windsor Castle 2 days after the birth. While the photos were beautiful and the interview charming, the departure from tradition unsettled many who felt that royal protocol existed for good reasons. More concerning to palace officials was what these changes signaled about Harry and Meghan's long-term intentions. If they were willing to break with tradition on something as significant as the birth of their child, what other established protocols might they challenge? The monarchy relied on predictability and continuity. Sudden changes, even positive ones, could undermine public confidence in the institution. The summer of 2019 brought additional challenges as Harry and Meghan's relationship with the media reached a breaking point. They had grown increasingly frustrated with what they saw as unfair and often racist coverage of Meghan. The constant speculation about her relationship with Catherine, the criticism of her fashion choices, and the invasive coverage of her family situation had taken a serious toll on her mental health. Harry's protective instincts, already heightened by his memories of how the media had treated his mother, went into overdrive. He began to see every negative story as evidence of a deliberate campaign against his wife. While some of the coverage was indeed problematic, Harry's response was to wage war against the entire British media establishment rather than work within the existing system to address specific issues. This approach put him at odds with other family members who had learned to manage media relationships through careful diplomacy rather than open confrontation. The royal family's traditional approach was to maintain cordial relationships with the press while occasionally using palace officials to address particularly egregious coverage. Harry wanted to take a much more aggressive stance. The situation exploded in October 2019 when Harry and Meghan decided to take legal action against several media outlets while on an official royal tour of southern Africa. The timing was particularly poor. They were supposed to be representing Britain abroad, but instead found themselves embroiled in legal battles that dominated news coverage of the tour. During a television interview filmed during the tour, Meghan made comments that sent shockwaves through the palace. When asked about her mental health, she admitted that she was struggling and that few people had asked if she was okay. While her honesty was praised by many, palace officials were horrified that she had discussed such personal matters in a public forum without consulting them first. More damaging was Harry's statement in the same documentary that he and William were on different paths. This was the first public acknowledgement that the brothers' relationship was strained, and it contradicted years of careful palace messaging about family unity. The comment was seen as a deliberate attempt to air family grievances in public, something the royal family had always tried to avoid. Back in London, William was deeply hurt by his brother's public comments. He had tried to support Harry and Meghan while also fulfilling his own royal duties, but he felt that Harry was making this increasingly difficult. The brothers had always been close, bonded by their shared experience of losing their mother at a young age. To see that relationship playing out in the media was painful for both of them. The tension between the brothers became more visible during official engagements. Where once they had appeared relaxed and joking together, now they seemed formal and distant. Body language experts noted the lack of eye contact and the physical space they maintained between each other during public appearances. Catherine found herself in a particularly awkward position. The media had created a narrative of rivalry between her and Meghan, despite both women's efforts to maintain a cordial relationship. Every interaction between them was analyzed for signs of tension, every outfit choice was compared, and every smile or lack thereof was interpreted as evidence of deeper conflicts. The reality was more complex than the media portrayed. Catherine and Meghan were very different people with different backgrounds and approaches to royal life. Catherine had spent nearly a decade learning how to navigate royal protocols before she married William. Meghan was expected to master the same skills in a matter of months. This led to misunderstandings and miscommunications that were magnified by intense media scrutiny. One incident that particularly strained relationships occurred during the planning for the 2019 Christmas celebrations. Harry and Meghan wanted to establish new traditions that reflected their American and British heritage. They proposed hosting their own Christmas gathering for friends who couldn't be with their families, in addition to attending the traditional royal gathering at Sandringham. Palace officials explained that this wasn't possible due to security concerns and the need to coordinate protection services across multiple locations. They also worried that a separate celebration might be seen as the couple creating an alternative royal court, which could undermine the unity of the institution. Harry and Meghan saw this response as yet another example of unnecessary restrictions on their freedom. They felt that they should be allowed to maintain their own friendships and create their own traditions, particularly around holidays that were important to Meghan's family. The disagreement highlighted the fundamental tension between personal autonomy and royal duty that had been building since their marriage. The Christmas controversy was resolved when Harry and Meghan agreed to attend Sandringham but made it clear they were unhappy with the restrictions placed on them. Their body language during the traditional Christmas morning walk to church was notably stiff, and they left earlier than usual, citing their young son's needs. Behind the scenes, more serious conversations were taking place about Harry and Meghan's future role within the royal family. Palace officials were growing concerned about the pattern of conflicts and the couple's apparent unwillingness to work within established frameworks. There were discussions about whether their roles needed to be redefined or whether additional support systems needed to be put in place. William was particularly worried about the long-term implications of his brother's behavior. As the heir to the throne, he understood that the monarchy needed to evolve and modernize, but he also believed that changes needed to be made carefully and gradually. Harry's approach seemed to threaten the stability that the institution required to maintain public confidence. The brothers attempted several private conversations to work through their differences, but these often ended in frustration. Harry felt that William didn't understand the pressure he and Meghan were under or the specific challenges they faced as an interracial couple in an institution steeped in tradition. William felt that Harry was being unreasonable in his expectations and wasn't giving the royal system a fair chance to work. One particularly difficult conversation occurred in late 2019 when William tried to suggest that Harry might benefit from taking some time away from royal duties to focus on his mental health and family life. Harry interpreted this as William trying to push him out of the royal family, while William meant it as a genuine offer of support and understanding. These misunderstandings reflected the broader communication breakdown that was occurring within the family. Years of shared experience and mutual understanding were being eroded by the pressure of public scrutiny and competing priorities. The brothers who had once been each other's closest confidants were becoming strangers. As 2019 drew to a close, it was becoming clear that the situation was unsustainable. Harry and Meghan were increasingly isolated within the royal structure, frustrated by what they saw as lack of support and understanding. Other family members were growing weary of the constant drama and the way it was affecting the monarchy's public image. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown that would ultimately force the family to choose between unity and authenticity, between tradition and personal happiness. What none of them realized was that the events of early 2020 would bring everything to a head in a way that would change the royal family forever and leave William with impossible choices about his brother's future. The first month of 2020 would prove to be the most turbulent period in modern royal history, a time when years of simmering tensions finally erupted into a crisis that no one had fully anticipated. What began as private family discussions about Harry and Meghan's unhappiness quickly spiraled into a public relations nightmare that would fundamentally alter the structure of the British monarchy. The catalyst for what would become known as Megxit was actually a seemingly innocent idea proposed during the family's traditional New Year discussions about the upcoming year's engagements. Harry and Meghan had been reflecting on their struggles throughout 2019 and had come to the conclusion that their current arrangement wasn't working for anyone involved. They were unhappy, the family was stressed, and the constant negative media coverage was damaging the monarchy's reputation. Their initial proposal was actually quite reasonable and showed that they had given considerable thought to finding a solution that would work for everyone. They suggested taking on a reduced role within the royal family, spending part of their time in North America to escape the intense British media scrutiny while continuing to support the Queen and the Commonwealth. They envisioned themselves as modern, international royals who could help the monarchy connect with younger and more diverse audiences around the world. The concept wasn't entirely without precedent. Other European royal families had successfully adapted to modern circumstances by allowing family members to take on different types of roles. The Norwegian and Swedish royal families, for example, had found ways to balance tradition with contemporary needs. Harry and Meghan believed they could pioneer a similar approach for the British monarchy. However, their proposal immediately ran into the complex realities of how the British royal system actually operates. Unlike other monarchies, the British system relies heavily on the principle of full-time commitment to royal duties. The idea of part-time royalty raised numerous practical and constitutional questions that palace officials had never had to consider before. Security was the most immediate concern. Royal protection is provided by specialist police units that work closely with intelligence services to assess and respond to threats. Having royals spending significant time in foreign countries, particularly in the United States with its different legal and security frameworks, created unprecedented challenges. The costs and logistics of providing adequate protection across multiple countries were staggering. There were also diplomatic considerations that Harry and Meghan hadn't fully appreciated. As members of the royal family, their actions and statements in foreign countries would inevitably be interpreted as representing British government positions. Their proposed independence could create situations where they might inadvertently contradict official British foreign policy or create diplomatic incidents. The financial aspects of their proposal were equally problematic. Royal finances are carefully structured to ensure transparency and accountability to the British public.
The idea of royals earning independent income while also receiving public funding raised questions about conflicts of interest and the commercialization of royal status.
How could they ensure that their private activities wouldn't compromise their royal roles or create the appearance of the monarchy being used for personal profit?
When palace officials began explaining these complications, Harry and Meghan became increasingly frustrated. They felt that the obstacles being raised were excuses rather than genuine concerns, and that the establishment was simply unwilling to consider new approaches. Their frustration was compounded by their perception that other family members, particularly William, weren't advocating strongly enough for creative solutions. The discussions that took place throughout January 2020 were intense and emotional. Family members genuinely wanted to find a way to help Harry and Meghan while also protecting the institution of the monarchy. But the gulf between what the couple wanted and what seemed practically possible was proving difficult to bridge. Harry had become convinced that the only way forward was to make a dramatic public statement that would force the family to take their concerns seriously. He felt that private negotiations were going nowhere and that they needed to apply public pressure to create momentum for change. This approach reflected his growing distrust of palace officials and his belief that the royal establishment was fundamentally resistant to reform. Meghan supported this strategy, although she was perhaps more aware than Harry of how such a move would be perceived publicly. Her experience in the entertainment industry had taught her about the power of controlling one's own narrative, but she also understood that once you go public with family disputes, there's often no way back to private resolution. The decision to release their bombshell statement on January 8, 2020, was made after a particularly difficult family meeting where they felt their concerns had been dismissed. The statement, posted on their newly created Instagram account without any advance warning to the family, announced their intention to step back as senior members of the royal family and to work to become financially independent.
The impact was immediate and devastating.
Palace officials, who had been working behind the scenes to find solutions, were blindsided by the public announcement. The Queen, who had been personally involved in trying to accommodate her grandson's wishes, felt betrayed by the way the matter had been handled. Other family members were hurt and angry that such a private family matter had been aired publicly without any consultation.
William's reaction was perhaps the most intense of all.
He felt that his brother had not only damaged the monarchy but had also destroyed any possibility of finding a workable compromise. The public nature of the announcement made it impossible to continue private negotiations and forced the family into a crisis management mode that would ultimately lead to much harsher outcomes than might have been possible through continued private discussions.
The media reaction was explosive.
Within hours, news organizations around the world were leading with the story, and royal correspondents were struggling to explain what the announcement actually meant in practical terms. The lack of detail in Harry and Meghan's statement created a vacuum that was filled with speculation, much of it inaccurate or inflammatory.
The public response was sharply divided.
Younger people and those who had followed Harry and Meghan's struggles with sympathy largely supported their decision to prioritize their mental health and family life over royal duty. Older generations and traditionalists were appalled by what they saw as a selfish abandonment of responsibility and a betrayal of the Queen during her later years. The crisis deepened when it became clear that Harry and Meghan had significantly underestimated the complexity of their desired arrangement. The idea of being financially independent while retaining royal titles and some official duties proved to be largely unworkable. The monarchy simply couldn't allow family members to use their royal status for commercial purposes while also representing the crown in official capacities. Emergency meetings were called involving the Queen, Charles, William, and Harry. These sessions, later dubbed the Sandringham Summit, were described by participants as some of the most difficult conversations in the family's recent history. The goal was to find a solution that would allow Harry and Meghan to have the independence they wanted while protecting the monarchy from potential damage. William found himself in an impossible position during these negotiations. As Harry's brother, he wanted to support him and find a way to keep the family together. But, as the future king, he also had to consider the long-term implications of any arrangement they agreed to.
If Harry and Meghan were allowed to maintain royal titles while pursuing independent careers, what would prevent other family members from making similar demands in the future?
The discussions revealed fundamental disagreements about the nature of royal service itself. Harry and Meghan viewed their royal roles as jobs that should be subject to normal employment considerations like work-life balance and career satisfaction. Other family members saw royal service as a calling that transcended personal preferences and required complete dedication to duty above self-interest. Harry's position was that he had never chosen this life and should be allowed to create his own path while still supporting his grandmother and the causes he cared about. William's response was that none of them had chosen their roles, but that didn't diminish their responsibility to fulfill them with dignity and commitment. The negotiations were further complicated by the intense media attention surrounding every development. Details of private family discussions were leaking to the press, creating additional tension and making it even harder to find solutions. Everyone involved felt under enormous pressure to reach a resolution quickly, but the complexity of the issues involved made rapid solutions nearly impossible. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the crisis was watching the relationship between the brothers deteriorate in real time. Years of closeness and mutual support were being eroded by stress, miscommunication, and competing loyalties. Both William and Harry later admitted that they said things during this period that they regretted, but the damage to their relationship was becoming increasingly difficult to repair. The Queen's intervention proved crucial in breaking the deadlock. She announced that the family had agreed to allow Harry and Meghan to step back from royal duties entirely rather than trying to maintain the partial arrangement they had originally sought. This clean-break approach avoided the complications of part-time royalty but also meant that Harry and Meghan would lose their royal titles, public funding, and official roles. The announcement of this arrangement on January 18, 2020, satisfied no one completely but represented the best compromise available under the circumstances. Harry and Meghan got their independence but lost much of what had made them attractive to potential commercial partners. The royal family maintained its institutional integrity but lost two of its most popular and modern members. For William, the resolution represented both a victory and a profound loss. He had successfully protected the monarchy from a potentially damaging precedent, but he had also watched his brother choose to leave the family entirely rather than work within the system. The cost of maintaining institutional stability had been the effective exile of his only sibling. As the details of Harry and Meghan's departure were finalized over the following months, it became clear that this was not a temporary separation but a fundamental rupture. The couple's move to California, their subsequent media deals, and their public criticisms of the royal family would ensure that the wounds opened during this period would continue to fester for years to come. The crisis had revealed fundamental tensions within the modern monarchy about the balance between personal freedom and public duty, between tradition and adaptation, and between family loyalty and institutional preservation. These tensions would continue to shape royal policy and family relationships long after Harry and Meghan had settled into their new lives in America. The period following Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties was supposed to mark the beginning of healing and moving forward. Instead, it became the start of an unprecedented public battle between the Sussexes and the royal establishment that would dominate headlines for years and force King William into increasingly difficult positions as he tried to protect both his family and the monarchy itself. The transition period, officially lasting until March 2020, was marked by careful negotiations about everything from security arrangements to the use of royal titles. Palace officials worked meticulously to ensure that every detail was properly handled, hoping to minimize future complications. However, what they couldn't control was Harry and Meghan's growing willingness to share their version of events with the world. The couple's final official royal engagements in March 2020 were emotionally charged affairs that highlighted the complexity of their situation. Their appearance at the Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey was particularly poignant, as it brought together the entire royal family for what many suspected might be the last time in years. The body language was telling. Harry and Meghan appeared isolated from the rest of the family, with minimal interaction and formal greetings that spoke volumes about the current state of relationships. William watched these final engagements with mixed emotions. Part of him hoped that seeing Harry perform his royal duties one last time might remind his brother of the value and importance of their shared mission. Another part of him worried that the visible tension between family members was sending troubling messages to the public about the stability of the monarchy itself. The COVID-19 pandemic, which emerged just as Harry and Meghan were settling into their new life in California, added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. While the royal family worked to support Britain through the crisis, maintaining morale and continuing essential duties despite lockdown restrictions, Harry and Meghan were establishing themselves in a completely different world of celebrity activism and media production.
The contrast was stark and deliberate.
The working royals focused on supporting healthcare workers, maintaining connections with Commonwealth countries, and providing stability during uncertain times. Harry and Meghan, meanwhile, began making public statements about social justice issues and started developing content for streaming platforms. Both approaches had merit, but they represented fundamentally different interpretations of public service and social responsibility. The first major escalation in the post-departure relationship came with the couple's decision to sit down with Oprah Winfrey for a tell-all interview that would air in March 2021, almost exactly 1 year after their departure from royal duties. The decision to participate in such an interview represented a complete break with royal tradition and sent shockwaves through the palace when it was announced. Royal family members had historically maintained strict policies about not giving personal interviews or discussing internal family matters publicly. The principle of never complain, never explain had served the monarchy well for decades by avoiding the kind of public disputes that could damage the institution's reputation. Harry and Meghan's decision to break this tradition represented a fundamental challenge to how the royal family managed its public image. The preparations for the Oprah interview created intense anxiety within the palace. Legal teams worked to understand what restrictions, if any, applied to Harry and Meghan's ability to discuss their time as working royals. Communication strategies were developed to respond to whatever revelations might emerge. Most importantly, family members had to prepare emotionally for the possibility that private conversations and family disputes would be aired before a global audience of millions. William found himself in the particularly difficult position of not knowing exactly what his brother might reveal. The brothers had shared countless personal conversations over the years, many of them about family dynamics, royal duties, and their shared struggles with public life. The possibility that these private moments might be weaponized for public consumption was deeply troubling to someone who valued both family loyalty and institutional discretion. When the interview finally aired on March 7, 2021, it exceeded everyone's worst expectations for damage and controversy. Meghan's allegations that a family member had expressed concerns about her unborn child's skin color sent shockwaves around the world and immediately raised questions about racism within the royal family. Her claims about not receiving adequate mental health support painted the palace establishment as callous and uncaring. Perhaps most damaging to family relationships was Harry's assertion that his father had stopped taking his phone calls and that William was trapped within the royal system. These revelations turned private family dynamics into public talking points and made future reconciliation exponentially more difficult. The palace's initial response was carefully measured but clearly inadequate for the scale of the crisis. The statement that some recollections may vary was seen by many as dismissive and tone-deaf, particularly regarding the serious allegations of racism. William, who had been consulted on the response, later admitted privately that the family had underestimated the public impact of Meghan's claims. 2 days after the interview aired, William made his first public comments about the controversy when approached by reporters during a school visit. His statement that the royal family was very much not a racist family was spontaneous and heartfelt but also highlighted how unprepared the institution was for this type of public relations crisis. The interview's aftermath revealed fundamental differences in how the two sides understood truth, privacy, and loyalty. Harry and Meghan felt they had finally been able to share their authentic experience and challenge what they saw as institutional racism and neglect. The royal family felt that private conversations had been mischaracterized and that complex situations had been oversimplified for dramatic effect. The damage to relationships was immediate and severe. Charles was reportedly devastated by Harry's claims about their relationship, particularly the assertion that he had cut off financial support without warning. William was hurt and angry about being characterized as trapped and felt that Harry had betrayed confidences and misrepresented their conversations. More broadly, the interview created a crisis of confidence in the monarchy's ability to adapt to modern expectations about diversity and inclusion. The allegations of racism, whether accurate or exaggerated, forced uncomfortable conversations about the institution's history and its relevance in a multicultural society. The months following the Oprah interview saw an escalating war of words conducted through media proxies and carefully placed stories. Palace officials worked to counter the Sussexes' narrative without appearing to attack them directly, while Harry and Meghan's representatives pushed back against what they saw as attempts to undermine their credibility. This shadow boxing through the media was particularly damaging because it kept the controversies alive in public discourse while making private reconciliation nearly impossible. Every news story required a response, every response generated counter-responses, and the cycle of conflict became self-perpetuating. The situation was further complicated by Harry's decision to write a memoir, announced in July 2021. The prospect of an even more detailed account of his royal experience created fresh anxiety within the palace and suggested that Harry's willingness to share family secrets publicly had no apparent limits. William watched these developments with growing frustration and sadness. The brother he had once been closest to seemed determined to damage the institution that would one day be William's responsibility to lead. Every new revelation or media appearance made the prospect of family reconciliation more remote. The release of Harry's memoir, Spare, in January 2023, represented perhaps the lowest point in the brothers' relationship. The book's detailed accounts of private conversations, physical altercations, and family dynamics crossed lines that many believe should never have been crossed. Harry's description of William as his arch-nemesis and the revelation of physical confrontation between the brothers shocked even those who had followed the family's struggles closely. The book's publication created a new dilemma for William, who was by then the Prince of Wales following his father's accession to the throne. As the heir apparent, he had to consider not just his personal feelings about his brother's revelations but also the long-term impact on the monarchy's reputation and stability. The memoir also revealed the extent to which Harry's perspective on family events differed from that of other family members. Stories that palace insiders remembered one way were presented completely differently in Harry's account, highlighting how the same events could be interpreted in radically different ways depending on one's perspective and emotional state. Perhaps most troubling for the future of family relationships was Harry's apparent inability to understand why his public revelations were so damaging to others. In interviews promoting the book, he expressed confusion about why family members weren't speaking to him and suggested that they were the ones who needed to apologize for their treatment of him and Meghan. This fundamental disconnect about responsibility and accountability made reconciliation extremely difficult. Harry seemed to view his public statements as justified responses to mistreatment, while his family saw them as unprovoked attacks that made private resolution impossible. By 2024, the war of words had settled into a pattern of periodic flare-ups around significant events or anniversaries. Harry and Meghan's media appearances often included references to their royal experience, while palace officials worked to minimize the impact of these statements on the monarchy's ongoing work. For William, now bearing the title of Prince of Wales that Harry had once expected to respect and support, the situation represented a fundamental challenge to his vision of modern monarchy. He had always believed that the institution could evolve while maintaining its core values of service, duty, and discretion. Harry's approach suggested a complete rejection of those values in favor of personal authenticity and public accountability. The ongoing conflict also highlighted the changing nature of celebrity and public life in the digital age. Harry and Meghan's ability to reach millions of people directly through social media and streaming platforms gave them power that previous royal rebels had never possessed. They could shape public opinion and challenge institutional narratives in ways that would have been impossible in earlier eras. As William prepared for his eventual role as king, he had to grapple with the reality that his brother had become not just an absent family member but an active critic of the institution he would one day lead. This presented unprecedented challenges for maintaining royal unity and public confidence while also dealing with the personal pain of a shattered family relationship. The death of Queen Elizabeth II on September 8, 2022, marked not just the end of an era but the beginning of King William's greatest test as the future monarch. With his father's accession as King Charles III, William became the Prince of Wales and heir apparent, carrying new responsibilities and the weight of decisions that would shape the monarchy for generations to come. Among the most pressing and painful of these decisions was what to do about his estranged brother Harry and the ongoing damage to the royal family's reputation. The funeral of Queen Elizabeth II provided a temporary ceasefire in the family's public warfare.
Harry and Meghan returned to Britain for the ceremonies, and the world watched carefully for any signs of reconciliation between the brothers. The images of William and Harry walking together behind their grandmother's coffin recalled similar scenes from their mother's funeral 25 years earlier, evoking powerful emotions about family, loss, and the passage of time. But the similarities ended there. Unlike the united front they had presented as grieving children, the adult princes maintained careful distance from each other throughout the funeral proceedings. Their interactions were formal and minimal, conducted under the watchful eyes of global media and family members who hoped against hope that their shared grief might bridge the gulf that had developed between them. William approached the funeral period with mixed emotions. Part of him hoped that being together during such a significant moment might remind Harry of their shared history and the bonds that had once seemed unbreakable. Another part of him worried that Harry might use the occasion to create more drama or make statements that would overshadow their grandmother's memory. The funeral passed without major incident, but the temporary truce did nothing to address the underlying issues that had driven the brothers apart. If anything, Harry's brief return to royal duties highlighted how much his perspective had changed during his time in California. He seemed uncomfortable with the protocols and formalities that had once been second nature, and his interactions with other family members were notably strained. More concerning to William was Harry's apparent expectation that the family should simply move past their disagreements without addressing the damage that had been done. Harry seemed to believe that their shared grief should automatically restore their previous relationship, without acknowledging the hurt his public statements had caused or taking responsibility for the ongoing tensions. In the months following the funeral, it became clear that Harry's brief return had not marked the beginning of reconciliation but, rather, the end of any immediate possibility for healing. The memoir Spare, published in January 2023, made any hope of private resolution virtually impossible by revealing intimate family details and portraying William in particularly unflattering terms. The book forced William to confront some painful truths about his relationship with his brother and his role in the family dynamics that had led to this crisis. Harry's account, while clearly one-sided and written from a place of pain and anger, contained enough recognizable elements to make William question whether he could have handled things differently during the crucial period leading up to Harry's departure. But William also recognized that dwelling on past mistakes would not solve the current crisis. As the future king, he had to focus on protecting the monarchy's long-term interests while also considering what was best for his own family and the broader royal family. This meant making difficult decisions about how much additional damage he was willing to tolerate in the name of family loyalty. The publication of Spare represented a turning point in William's thinking about his brother's intentions and the possibility of reconciliation. The book's revelations about private conversations, including details about Catherine's reaction to Meghan's wedding preparations and accounts of physical altercation between the brothers, crossed lines that William felt should have been sacred. More troubling was Harry's apparent lack of understanding about why these revelations were so damaging. In interviews promoting the book, Harry expressed frustration that family members weren't reaching out to him, seemingly unaware that his own actions had made such contact extremely difficult if not impossible. This disconnect highlighted a fundamental problem that had been developing since Harry's marriage to Meghan. Harry increasingly saw himself as the victim of an unfair system and uncaring family, while other family members saw him as someone who had abandoned his responsibilities and, then, attacked them publicly for his own choices. William began to realize that traditional approaches to family conflict resolution were unlikely to work in this situation. Harry's willingness to monetize family disputes through book deals and media appearances suggested that he had fundamentally different values and priorities than the rest of the royal family. This made reconciliation not just difficult but potentially dangerous for the monarchy's future. The decision about how to respond to Harry's ongoing public commentary became increasingly complex as William's own responsibilities grew. As Prince of Wales, he had to consider not just his personal feelings but also the impact on the Commonwealth realms, the British government's relationship with the monarchy, and public confidence in the institution itself. One of the most difficult aspects of the situation was the way it affected William's children. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were growing up in a world where their uncle regularly criticized their family in public forums. William and Catherine worked hard to shield their children from the worst of the media coverage, but they couldn't entirely protect them from the knowledge that their family was divided.
The children's questions about why Uncle Harry didn't visit anymore and why he said mean things about their family in newspapers and on television were heartbreaking for William to answer. How do you explain to young children that sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, and that sometimes those choices have consequences that can't easily be undone? William also had to consider the impact on Catherine, who had been personally targeted in Harry's book and public statements. The stress of constant public scrutiny and family conflict had taken a toll on her health and well-being, and William felt a responsibility to protect his wife from further attacks. The decision about whether to take formal action against Harry crystallized around several key considerations. First was the question of whether Harry's behavior constituted a genuine threat to the monarchy's stability and effectiveness. While his criticisms were certainly damaging, the institution had survived worse scandals and crises throughout its history. Second was the question of precedent. If the royal family took action against Harry for his public statements, what message would that send about tolerance for dissent and criticism within the family? Future generations of royals might feel even more constrained in their ability to express concerns or seek changes to royal protocols. Third was the personal dimension. Despite everything that had happened, Harry was still William's brother and the uncle to his children. Taking action against him would likely make reconciliation impossible and could create a permanent rift that would affect the family for generations. But there was also a fourth consideration that was becoming increasingly important: the need to protect the monarchy's future effectiveness and public support. If Harry's criticisms were allowed to continue unchallenged, they might gradually erode public confidence in the institution and make William's eventual reign more difficult. The turning point came in late 2023 when Harry and Meghan made statements about the royal family's response to several international crises that directly contradicted British government policy. This crossed a line from personal family disputes into potential diplomatic embarrassment and constitutional impropriety. William realized that Harry's activities were no longer just personal attacks on family members but were beginning to interfere with the monarchy's constitutional role and international relationships. This elevated the issue from a family matter to a matter of national importance that required a more formal response. The decision to take action was not made lightly or quickly. William consulted with his father, senior palace officials, and constitutional experts before concluding that some form of intervention was necessary to protect the monarchy's integrity and effectiveness. The specific form that action might take remained an open question. Options ranged from private legal warnings about the use of royal titles in commercial activities to more public statements distancing the royal family from Harry's opinions and activities. Each approach carried different risks and potential benefits. What was becoming clear to William was that the era of tolerating Harry's public commentary in the hopes that he would eventually return to the family fold was coming to an end. The damage was becoming too extensive and the precedent too dangerous to allow the situation to continue indefinitely. As King William prepared to make what might be the most difficult decision of his royal career, he found himself weighing competing values that had shaped his entire life: family loyalty versus institutional duty, personal forgiveness versus public responsibility, and the hope for eventual reconciliation versus the need to protect the monarchy's future. The choice he would ultimately make would define not just his relationship with his brother but also his approach to kingship and his vision for the monarchy's role in the modern world. It was a decision that no previous monarch had been forced to make, and one that would resonate through royal history for generations to come. The clock was ticking, the pressure was mounting, and King William could no longer avoid the question that had haunted him for years: would he choose the crown over his brother? The answer would determine the future of both the royal family and the institution they had sworn to serve.